mentioned by the Secretary, is a responsible way to manage tensions, clear up misperceptions, avoid miscalculations, and all of this is in our interest to do that. We have been very clear about the areas in which we disagree, including the clear differences we see when it comes to democracies and autocracies.
A lot of talking points there from the State Department responding to Beijing, which said it strongly opposes President Biden calling Xi Jinping a dictator. Not sure what else to call him. This, as the Wall Street Journal reported, that the U.S. has tracked Huawei and ZTE workers entering suspected Chinese spy sites in Cuba. Joining us right now is Kentucky Congressman, member of the House Financial Services, Foreign Affairs, and the China Select Subcommittee, Andy Barr. Congressman, it's always a pleasure to see you. Thanks so much for being here this morning.
Good to be with you, Maria.
First, let's talk China and this Cuba spy center. We understand that there will be a training facility that they're preparing, meaning that Chinese troops could be 100 miles away from the coast of Florida. Can you tell us anything about this?
Yeah, this is why the Blinken trip was a bad idea. Why are we rewarding bad behavior? There's nothing wrong with engagement or diplomacy, but when you do so from a position of weakness, you're not going to achieve much. The problem with the administration's approach on China is that they continuously engage in what I would consider zombie diplomacy, where they're desperately seeking engagement and diplomacy with China, but they're not doing anything about China's bad behavior, whether it's a spy balloon traversing sensitive military sites across the continental United States, or whether it's the new spy base 90 miles from the shores of our country, whether it's ripping up an international treaty in Hong Kong or genocide in Xinjiang with the Uyghurs, the theft of intellectual property, accessing our capital markets to finance Chinese military and surveillance companies. All of this malign behavior needs a response. China is systematically financing Russia's aggression in Ukraine by buying their natural gas. We're doing nothing about it. It's time for sanctions. It's time for pre-positioning defensive weapons in Taiwan to give Taiwan and that democratic island the ability to defend itself and deter war. And we need a tougher response on this Cuba spy situation and the spy balloon.
No.
But instead, this administration, Secretary Blinken, downplaying all of these malign activities and desperately seeking cooperation from China over climate and other issues, and turning a blind eye to all of these violations of international law.
Well, why? Is it because he's compromised? Why? Why aren't we responding to all of this? Not to mention they set up police stations in America. Hundreds of billions of dollars taken from corporate America with this intellectual property theft. And look what we've got. We've got U.S. investors pretty much funding the expansion of the CCP. They were able to buy stocks of Chinese companies tied to the Chinese military in the thrift fund, the 401k for government employees. They're able to buy these companies that are actually sanctioned already. Why? Where's the response? What can you do as an elected official?
Well, of course, investigations related to whether or not the Biden family is compromised are ongoing, but I think it's just a misguided foreign policy that projects weakness. The way to achieve gains diplomatically is to negotiate from a position of strength. Yeah. And we are not doing that right now. The administration is so eager for a dialogue, and China is showing indifference at best. And that imbalance in the diplomatic conversation is why we will not achieve any of our diplomatic goals. We want peace, we want to avoid war, but the way to do that and the way to protect democracies like Taiwan is strength and deterrence. And this administration is not showing that. We need sanctions on bad actors in China. And the other thing what we need to do, Maria, you pointed this out, is capital flows. We need a strong investment restriction so American investors are no longer financing bad actors in China, military companies, technology companies that threaten our national security. We're working on that legislation, as you know, and if the administration won't act, Congress needs to.
Yeah, I mean, look, Mike Baker, jump in here, because the White House leaked some crazy story a couple of months ago that Biden was about to come up with limitations on investing in Chinese companies. It never materialized. I wasn't expecting it to materialize.
Right. No, U.S. companies have been chasing the holy grail of China and the Chinese securities market for decades. Oftentimes, nothing materializes. Congressman, the Chinese regime under Xi has been building ground-based satellites in South America. They've been strengthening their ties in Central America. The president of Honduras was just in China. Right? But the most visible evidence of their growth and their projection of outward power is the issue of Cuba. And the question is there a red line that you perceive? I mean, obviously, they have a listening facility in Cuba now, and they've had that for some time. The talk about building a military training installation in Cuba, at what point is there a red line that says enough is enough and there's actual pushback?
Well, I think they've crossed the red line from my perspective, and that's why there does need to be pushback. This is an all-encompassing competition that we're engaged in. It's military, it's economic, it's diplomatic, and the response requires that level of comprehensive policy. And so we're not seeing that from this administration. Look at what the Chinese are doing in our own hemisphere, as you said, the spy station in South America. But the Belt and Road Initiative requires a much more robust response from the United States. This debt trap diplomacy is a real problem, and they're weaponizing the supply chains against us. The United States is pursuing this wrong-headed strategy of moving all of our domestic vehicle fleet to battery electric vehicles, but we don't have the critical minerals to actually manufacture the batteries.
That's right.
So we're becoming more, not less dependent on China. And so we need to actually develop the supply chain resiliency if we're going to move in this direction.
Yeah, I mean, Biden just sends all the business to communist China. Congressman, I got to switch gears and ask you about your other work. You and your colleague, Congressman Rick Allen, are pushing the Ensuring Sound Guidance Act. This would protect retail investors and retirement and investment accounts from asset managers who force environmental, social goals ahead of returns. Congressman, this is ESG. Tell us about this and what's wrong with ESG.
Well, the problem with this so-called environmental, social, and governance investing strategy that many retail investors are unknowingly being steered towards, the problem with this is that the politicization of capital allocation in people's retirement 401ks and their non-retirement investment accounts is that these are less diversified funds. They carry higher fees and lower returns. And that stands to reason because they are less diversified. Just as an example of the higher fees of these funds, the BlackRock ESG Aware Fund is 5 times more expensive in terms of fees as their plain vanilla iShares S&P 500 index fund. 43% higher fees. And many Americans don't even know that they're being invested in these funds. We also know that over the last 5 years, ESG funds have underperformed the market 250 basis points a year. So we need to expose this fraud and cancer in our capital markets. American retirees depend on returns. There is a personal savings crisis in this country. 80% of Americans are either somewhat concerned or extremely concerned that they're going to outlive their retirement savings. And so we need to give Americans what they deserve, retirement security, not politics in their retirement. Our bill will amend the Investor Advisors Act of 1940, and it amends ERISA because most of this savings is in retirement plans. And it simply requires investment advisors and ERISA fiduciaries to prioritize the financial performance of their retirement over these non-pecuniary factors like carbon emissions and social justice and diversity and inclusion requirements. Look, those may be important goals, but that's not for for-profit companies. For-profit companies need to focus on shareholder value and investor returns.
Yeah, and again, this all comes from the White House, again, putting this out there for BlackRock and others to implement. I'm with Daniel Garza this morning, the Libra Initiative president. Jump in here, Daniel.
Yeah, obviously a lot of folks feel that it is very much irresponsible to be deceitful by using the funds and the pension money, the retirement dollars of working class Americans to fund these woke fantasies of a lot of these folks that have politicized investment. But there is also maybe a space where these companies on their own can fund these projects if they wish to. Where do we balance both?
Well, the job of directors and officers of publicly traded corporations is to maximize shareholder value. And then shareholders, when they receive those returns, can do whatever they want with them in their charitable lives, in their philanthropic goals.
Yeah, great point.
And that's where charity comes in. That's where political activity comes in. What we're trying to do is depoliticize publicly traded companies, depoliticize Americans' retirement. Whether you're Republican, Democrat, conservative, liberal, moderate, Americans should not have to deal with asset managers politicizing.
Yeah.
And in many cases, supporting causes with which they disagree.
That's right.
So let's get politics out of asset management and investing, and let's let these companies, if they want to do something on their own, or these executives, asset managers, if they want to support a political cause, do so on their own dime and on their own time, and focus on investment returns and their fiduciary obligations to their shareholders.
Yeah, it's a great point, Congressman, because, as you said, a lot of investors don't even know what their shares are being voted for. So they're in the dark, and it's their money. Congressman, thank you. We'll be following all of that. We appreciate your time this morning.
Great to be with you.
All right, Andy Barr is in D.C., and stay with us. We'll be right back.